Hello fellow makeup lovers, how are you guys doing? Today we are going to do a eyeshadow palette tag that was created by Angelica Lyermar. I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing her name wrong, but I will have her video linked down below, and basically it's just a really fun tag. Some questions like which palette represents me, which palette represents happiness, like just a bunch of fun questions. So let's go ahead and jump right on in. So the very first question is, if I could pick an eyeshadow palette in my collection that represents me as a color story, and the first palette that I thought of, and it just seemed right, is the Natasha Nona Gold palette. I just love this palette so much. I just feel like the shades that are in here, the undertones, the pops of color, this just makes me really happy, and it just, I don't know, I feel like this palette is very, very me. I guess I could probably choose another palette that would be me in like a colorful way, but as far as neutral palettes go, this is one of my favorites ever, so I don't know, I just felt like this was the palette I had to choose. So the second question is basically the exact same thing, picking a palette that represents me, except this one is based on the packaging, and I feel like this was so hard to do. Like, I was looking through every single palette I own, I'm like, what represents me? And I just decided to cheat a little bit, which I might cheat like a few times during the course of this video. I decided to pull a blush palette out, and I don't know, I just love the packaging of this so much. I love the vibes that it has. So this is the Lunar Beauty Moon Prism blush palette. I love like the moon vibes. I love the pink, the purple, the blue. I feel like those are my favorite colors together. It's just so cute. I feel like if like my soul had colors, this is what it would be. That's so corny, but yep, I had to choose something, right? So the third question is, if I could pick an eyeshadow palette in my collection that represents spring, and this was super easy. So this palette definitely would not be representing me when it comes to packaging, because it gives me a little bit of the EBGBs, but I have to say the Tiny Marvels palette from Sydney Grace, I just feel like is such a perfect spring color story. I love the shades that are in here. I love the pops of pastels. The shimmers are just so beautiful and pretty. So question number 4 is, if I would pick an eyeshadow palette in my collection that represents happy, and this was another really hard one. I'm like, what palette makes me feel just like pure happiness, pure joy? And so this is another moment that I'm cheating, but this is just one of my favorite palettes, even if I put it together myself. So I'm gonna go ahead and say my Clionadh Stained Glass Collection eyeshadow palette. It's an empty palette that I have all my Clionadh singles in, but it just makes me happy. And I think the packaging and everything is stunning. As you can see, I accidentally broke it recently, so like that's what the mirror looks like. I literally double taped it, and then I went over everything in the palette with tape just to make sure that there were no particles of glass, and it was just a stressful experience. Oh, I forgot there's some Davina shadows in the bottom, so let's ignore those. But I just feel like my stained glass collection palette just, it makes me so happy. Like, it is so cute. Question number 5 is, if I would pick an eyeshadow palette in my collection that represents the dark / grungy in me, and this one was really fun. I chose the Melt Cosmetics Muerte palette just because I love this. I feel like it is the most fun grungy palette. Like, it has grungy tones for sure. It's a very deep dark palette, but I love that it has like the pop of red and blue and green and really beautiful shimmers. I did do a full dupe video for this palette, which I can link in the cards here in case you're curious to watch that, because it's unfortunately no longer available. But I just thought, like, if I was going grungy, I mean, I could choose something with like really beautiful grungy greens, and maybe like Menagerie Whale Song gives me those vibes. But then I just feel like this palette, there's just something about it that like pulls me in, and it's just so pretty. And then of course the packaging as well is just a whole vibe. Question number 6 is, if I could pick an eyeshadow palette in my collection that represents the girly in me, and this is really funny to me because there was a few palettes I was kind of going back and forth between, because there's like a certain vibe and a certain color story that gives me like girly, feminine energy, and then I looked at all 3 palettes and I was like, this is the same thing. So I'll just show you all 3 and you can see if you agree with me or not, but I feel like this is like girliness to me. The first palette I have here is the Menagerie Flight Club palette. I just love like the purple and pinky and rosy tones. I feel like it's just so pretty and girly. And then next I have the Sigil inspired Lavender Chinchilla palette. Again, not as, oh, that was my drink. Not as pinky, but it still has like those really beautiful soft purple vibes. And then lastly, I also was thinking of the Viseart Violet Entendu palette. These all just have like a very soft purple vibe that feels girly to me, so those are the palettes I thought of. I feel like there should have been one that was like, if I could pick an eyeshadow palette that gave me like very like baddie, sexy vibes, because I think I would go for the Lunar Beauty Eternal Eclipse or the Sydney Grace Enduring Love palette. I feel like there's just something about like a really nice, curated, neutral color story that just makes me feel really good. But I think that would be very different for everyone, like what makes them feel really like feeling themselves. So I would love if you guys would answer that in the comments. I'd be so curious to hear what your like feeling myself palette would be. The next question, number 7, is if I could pick an eyeshadow palette in my collection that represents fun. This was another super easy one. Definitely had to choose the Kaleidos Club Nebula palette. I just feel like there's no way that you can go into this palette and not come out with a fun look. Like, it's just so fun. I mean, it probably has a lot to do with the fact that there is only one pop of neutral in here, but I just think that all the tones, the shimmers, the mattes, like every time I have this palette on, I just feel like it's super fun to play with. And then the last question for this tag is if I could pick an eyeshadow palette in my collection that represents inspiration. And I went back and forth on how to answer this question because I feel like on one side you could do something where it's like a palette and you're just like, wow, this color story is just super inspiring. But I honestly feel like I have so many palettes that fit into that category. So I decided to kind of take it a different route where I just wanted to choose a palette that I feel is like everything about it feels so inspired. Not just the color story, but the theme and the names and everything. And I felt like I just could not choose the Glaminatrix U Beauty palette. If you don't know about this palette already, Glaminatrix is an Australian indie brand, and everything about this palette is just Australian. I can link the video that I did on this in the cards here, my first impression with swatches, and then I also did a 3 looks, but all of the names are different Australian slang. I mean, there's literally a shade called Budgie Smugglers, which, I mean, iconic. So I just really love this palette because you can see like the humor, the love, the inspiration, everything that was put into it. And then of course the color story is beautiful. The textures in here are absolutely stunning. Like, I think it's such a pretty palette. So yeah, this is the one that made me think of inspiration. That is everything for today's video. It was just a short, quick, fun tag. Like I said, feel free to leave any of your answers in the comment section. I'd be super curious to hear, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.